Good evening, friends. After the India-Russia annual summit, Prime Minister has had two very substantive bilaterals. The first one with President Xi Jinping of China, and the one which we have just concluded with President Jacob Zuma of South Africa. To brief you on these two very important bilateral meetings that Prime Minister had, I am delighted to have with me our Ambassador to China, Ambassador Vijay Gokhale, our High Commissioner to South Africa, Ambassador Ruchi Ghanshyam, and our Joint Secretary, Eastern and Southern Africa, Nina Malhotra. So I'll just first give you a readout on these two important meetings, and thereafter we'll open up the floor for questions. The meeting with President Xi Jinping began with Prime Minister thanking him for the warmth with which he had been received recently in Hangzhou for the G20 summit. Prime Minister commended President Xi Jinping for the excellent hospitality that had been offered to him and to all the other delegations, which had led to a very successful G20 summit. The two leaders expressed satisfaction at the pace of recent high-level exchanges between India and China. In this context, they had alluded to the counter-terrorism dialogue that had recently been held, the strategic economic dialogue that had taken place. President Xi alluded to the exhibition of Indian and Chinese relics, which is currently ongoing in Beijing. Meetings of think tanks and the youth were on the anvil. As the two leaders said, we are coordinating more closely and speaking frankly to each other. President Xi said, in fact, this was his third meeting with Prime Minister Modi this year alone. Thereafter, they reviewed the bilateral relationship and its various dimensions. They noted that investment and economic cooperation had registered a significant increase in the recent period. People-to-people exchanges had also intensified. Peace and tranquility on the border had been maintained. On BRICS, Prime Minister said that China had done a lot to strengthen the grouping. He said that the new development bank was a symbol of the partnership amongst the BRICS countries and a representation of the changing international order. He said we must make every effort to make the NDB into a global institution. President Xi lauded India's chairmanship of BRICS, and in particular, the outreach with the BIMSTEC countries, which he described as innovative. He said it would expand our circle of cooperation. Both sides recognized terrorism as a key issue. President Xi said that we should strengthen our security dialogue and our partnership. Prime Minister Modi said that both India and China had been victims of terrorism, which was a scourge afflicting the entire region. Afghanistan was suffering from it, as also Myanmar. President Xi had just returned from Bangladesh, which had also suffered from a horrific terrorist attack recently. Prime Minister said that today, no country is immune from terrorism. Hence, this is an issue on which we cannot afford to have any differences. In particular, Prime Minister said India and China must increase their coordination in the context of the United Nations 1267 Committee and look for common ground. Prime Minister also called for the development of a long-term roadmap which would be beneficial not just for India and China, but to all countries. President Xi agreed that terrorism and violent extremism were on the increase. He alluded to the threat from ISIL, and he said that India and China must step up their counter-terrorism efforts. President Xi said that we must maintain our strategic communication and dialogue on this subject. He called also for increased cooperation in areas such as railways, industrial parks, vocational and skill training, space, aviation, and ICT. He said that China was working to address the issue of the trade imbalance and encourage Chinese companies to invest in India. In terms of global issues, he said China is keen to work with India in forums such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SAARC, East Asia Summit, etc. He said that the commonalities between India and China far outweighed the differences. In this context, both sides welcomed the forthcoming visit of State Councillor Yang Jiechi, who, as you know, is the counterpart of the National Security Advisor, and we look forward to that dialogue and to further progress in India-China communication. Thereafter, there was a brief discussion on the nuclear suppliers group. Prime Minister said that we look forward to working with China to realize India's membership of the NSG. One round of consultations had already taken place between the two sides in Delhi, and President Xi said that the second round would also be happening very soon, and this would be helpful. So this, I think, gives you a broad gist of the conversation that took place between Prime Minister and President Xi. Let me now turn to South Africa. Prime Minister began by remembering very fondly his visit to what he called the Karm Bhumi of Mahatma Gandhi, the land of Gandhi and Mandela, and said that he was fortunate to have had this opportunity to pay tribute to the memory of these two great leaders. In particular, he said that the train journey that he undertook from Pentridge to Pietermaritzburg was truly unforgettable. President Zuma also greatly appreciated Prime Minister's state visit to South Africa. He described it as a historic visit, which he said was to a country that produced two great leaders. President Zuma said that India and South Africa have had a long relationship. The need now was to grow and deepen it even further. Prime Minister commended South Africa for the tremendous contribution it had made to the BRICS grouping. President Zuma said that on the bilateral side, we needed to expand our cooperation in areas such as renewable energy, higher education. He also called for simplification of the visa regime between the two countries. Prime Minister thanked President Zuma for the statement that he had issued post the terrorist attack in Uri. India, he said, greatly appreciated the solidarity that South Africa had shown on this very important subject. Terrorism, he said, is a global phenomena and it needs global action. In this context, he called for strengthened cooperation between India and China in United Nations Security Council fora dealing with terrorism, such as the 1267 Committee. He also called for working for the early adoption of the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, which, as you know, was proposed by India way back in 1996. Prime Minister also thanked President Zuma for South Africa's support to India's bid for membership of the Nuclear Suppliers Group and hoped that South Africa would continue to extend the support as our discussions continue on this subject. President Zuma alluded to two important milestones which were coming up. One was the 20th anniversary of the signing of the Red Fort Declaration. You know, this was signed when President Mandela had come on a state visit to India. He also alluded to the South Africa-India Joint Ministerial Commission, which is scheduled to take place in New Delhi in 2017. There was a discussion on trade and investment ties between the two countries. Both leaders acknowledged that the current volume of trade and investment was low and much more could be done to increase it. In this context, Prime Minister said that sectors such as minerals, energy, hydrocarbons were very promising areas. In particular, he said that South Africa's expertise in deep mining was something that India could utilize very, very profitably. Prime Minister then referred to the preferential trade agreement between India and the Southern African Customs Union. You know, this is the oldest customs union in the world, dating back to 1910. Our talks on the PTA have been hanging since 2007, and Prime Minister said that he had mentioned this during his visit to South Africa, and both sides needed to do more to conclude the negotiations on this important subject, which would increase India's trade and investment ties, not just with South Africa, but with all members of SACU. Both leaders also acknowledged the relevance of IBSA, India, Brazil, South Africa grouping, which, as you know, brings together three major democracies in 3 different continents, and said we must invigorate it and have more frequent meetings. So I think this was broadly the discussion in the context of South Africa, and the floor is now open for questions. Aditya?
Because on the 1267, this is Aditya Rajkol from Times Now. On the question of 1267 committee, Prime Minister, of course, highlighted that there should be some common ground. But has there been any kind of a presentation or any kind of evidence shared with China on the issue of Maulana Masood Azhar and the terror links and the evidences that India has already shared with Pakistan in this regard? And was there emphasis by the Prime Minister and also during the delegation talks that there should be condemnation, completely of the state sponsorship of terror as he did during the G20 as well?
I think India and China have maintained a continuous dialogue on the issue of terrorism. Ambassador will bear witness to the fact that at multiple levels this has been raised, including at the highest possible levels, including today, as I have just said. And I think the Chinese are very well aware of our concerns, of the need for us to, ensure that, globally designated terrorists are designated, globally notified terrorists are designated by the United Nations, through the designated mechanism. And I think there is close coordination between India and China on this issue, and I think that particular dialogue will continue. In case our ambassador wants to add anything on this subject.
I think on counterterrorism, both leaders essentially agreed that this was a scourge for the region as a whole, not just for the 2 countries. And both alluded to the first high-level dialogue on counterterrorism, which has been held after the Hangzhou summit. And there was a general agreement that this dialogue will continue and that we will try to enhance cooperation in counterterrorism for the benefit of the Asian region as a whole. So in that sense, I think this is a positive statement from both sides.
Yeah. Parikshit?
So my question on our NSG membership, China has maintained, and they said this very recently, that only countries which are signatories to the NPT can be included in the NSG. And these guidelines have been made by everyone in the nuclear suppliers group, and the NSG operates by consensus. And India also needs to fulfill that criteria. Was that same point reiterated by the Chinese delegation in the bilateral talks today?
No.
Manish Chand, India Rights Network. Just on NSG, what was the content of discussions today? How would you describe? Is there a movement forward? Is there some progress?
I think the very fact one round of dialogue has taken place. President Xi himself offered that the second round will take place very soon. I have already said this would be helpful. So I think this shows that at least there is good strategic dialogue and communication between India and China on this issue. And our aim, of course, is to narrow down the differences. Maha?
Maha Siddiqui from India Today TV. Sir, I want to know what was the response of China when the issue of Masood Azhar was brought up? Because just a few days before BRICS, China said that there was a difference of opinion in the UN committee. I specifically want to know China's response.
Look, as Ambassador has also just said, China clearly acknowledges the issue of terrorism, the danger that it poses. In fact, President Xi clearly said that China opposes all forms of terrorism, all manifestations of terrorism. This is an issue on which he said there must be increased coordination, cooperation with India. The counterterrorism dialogue has taken place. When the NSA meets State Councillor Yang Jiechi, I expect this issue will be taken up further. So we are maintaining a continuous dialogue with China, and our expectation and hope is that China will see the logic of what we are saying. Manish?
सर मुझे याद है कि हैंगजो में जब पीएम और चाइनीज़ प्रेसिडेंट के बीच बातचीत हुई थी तब ये कहा गया था कि दोनों साइड एक दूसरे के कंसर्न और इंटरेस्ट को समझे। तो क्या वो लोग ये नहीं समझ रहे कि मौलाना मसूद अजहर को लेकर हमारा कंसर्न क्या है या हमारा इंटरेस्ट कहाँ पर है?
नहीं, बिल्कुल मेरे ख्याल से उस मामले में तो मैं नहीं समझता हूँ कि हम लोग ने कोई कसर छोड़ी है। अपनी तरफ से हर स्तर पर हमने इस मुद्दे को उठाया है और उन्हें बताया है कि मौलाना मसूद अजहर का डेजिग्नेशन क्यों न केवल भारत के लिए बल्कि संपूर्ण विश्व समुदाय के लिए आवश्यक है, क्योंकि वो एक बहुत ही जैसे कहते हैं कि एक ऐसा टेररिस्ट है जिसकी पहुंच जो है वो केवल इस रीजन में ही नहीं बल्कि रीजन से बाहर भी है। एट द बैक त्रिवेदी जी।
जी, विजय त्रिवेदी, न्यूज़ नेशन से। सर, ब्रिक्स में जो आर्थिक मामले हैं, इकोनॉमिक लेवल की जो बातचीत है, इकोनॉमिक इंटरेस्ट हैं ब्रिक्स कंट्रीज़ के, उस पर चर्चा हो रही है, लेकिन हिंदुस्तान में चाइनीज़ प्रोडक्ट्स का बॉयकॉट का एक लगातार माहौल बना हुआ है। तो क्या इन दोनों चीज़ों को आप कंट्राडिक्शन के तौर पर देखते हैं, या भारत सरकार जो है चाइना को इस पर किस तरह से समझाइश देगी?
पहली बात तो ये बायकॉट की जो आप बात कर रहे हैं, ये किस आधिकारिक तौर पर किसने कहा है? इस तरह की तो कोई बातचीत नहीं है। ब्रिक्स जो है एक ग्रुपिंग ऐसी है जो कि प्राइमरीली इकोनॉमिक इश्यूज से शुरुआत हुई थी, अब पॉलिटिकल इश्यूज, ग्लोबल इश्यूज पर भी वो चर्चा करती है, और हम उम्मीद करते हैं कि जब ब्रिक्स की कल समिट होगी तो इकोनॉमिक इश्यूज, इकोनॉमिक मुद्दों पर तो चर्चा होगी, और एक विस्तृत प्लान ऑफ एक्शन निकलेगा जिसमें हम जो ब्रिक्स नेशन है वो इंट्रा ब्रिक्स ट्रेड, इन्वेस्टमेंट और कोऑपरेशन कैसे बढ़ा सकें, उस पर बहुत मेरे ख्याल से महत्वपूर्ण बातचीत होगी। गीता मोहन।
Geeta Mohan from NewsX. I just wanted to know, Vikas, whether if China-Pakistan economic corridor and the issue that India has with regards to CPEC, did it come up, and what was China's response?
Look, as I told you, I'm not going to go into each and every detail of what was discussed or not. Broadly speaking, I think our broad concerns in the current state of the relationship were conveyed to the Chinese side. The intention was that both sides should narrow down the areas of differences, since the commonalities far outweigh that, and that both sides should work together.
Venkat Narayan, a freelance journalist. This question is meant for our ambassador to China. We have been having a trade deficit with China for many years. I think it's more than $40 billion. The Chinese have been saying, we will look into this, we'll do something, and so on. But that's been going on again for many years. What exactly are they proposing to do, and how do they plan to reduce this trade deficit? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think firstly, they are well aware that there is an issue of a trade deficit. Secondly, I think that we are looking and we are talking to them about market access issues with a view to ensuring that barriers come down so that more Indian products reach China. And at the same time, the Chinese side is also telling us that they would like us to suggest products which are competitive in their market, and they will facilitate access. I think the third important point, and the point that Mr. Vikas Swarup made, was that one way of balancing trade is also to get more Chinese investment into India. So that creates employment, and that creates goods here which are both for the domestic market and for exports. And on that, certainly the President of China clearly conveyed that Chinese companies are interested in investing in India, that they see India as an investment destination with an immediate potential, and that the Chinese government will encourage such investments. I think that was a clear statement, and it is now for us to act on it.
Suhasini at the back.
I just wanted to clarify, because you maybe misspoke. I guess we're all tired. But during your comments on South Africa, you said that the Prime Minister raised coordination at the 1267 committee at the UN. South Africa is not in the UN. And then you went on to speak about the CCIT.
Correct.
So could you just clarify all those statements? Who did we raise what with?
Look, terrorist designations, the 15 members who sit in the 1267 committee do the designation, but all nations are equally interested. I mean, after all, terrorism is not a threat which is faced by one country or two countries. It's a universal threat. So the idea was that, every country supports each other when it comes to terrorist designation. So it was in that context, PM said there are designated structures within the UN which deal with terrorist designations, and which should increase our, coordination and our cooperation through those structures. That is what he meant. And CCIT, again, this is an issue that Prime Minister has taken up repeatedly with virtually every world leader that he has met. This is a very important issue for us. We believe that there is still a lacuna in the legal framework to combat international terrorism, which the CCIT is designed to close. And the sooner it is adopted, I think the better it would be, because then you would have a clear prosecute or extradite norm, which every country would be obliged to follow. Okay, last question.
सर, एक क्लियर अंडरस्टैंडिंग ये है कि अजहर मसूद को यूएन डेजिग्नेटेड इंटरनेशनल टेररिस्ट घोषित करने में चीन एक रोड़ा है, ऑब्स्टिकल है। क्या इस मुलाकात के बाद हम साफ तरीके से ये कह सकते हैं कि वो जो ऑब्स्टिकल है वो घटा है, कम हुआ है और आने वाले दिनों में अजहर मसूद को डेजिग्नेट किया जाएगा इंटरनेशनल टेररिस्ट।
नहीं देखिए, वो तो देखिए एक्शन ऑन द ग्राउंड से ही पता लगेगा ना। हम लोग तो सिर्फ अपनी बात उन तक पहुंचा सकते हैं और हर स्तर पर पहुंचाई है हम लोग ने अपनी बात। उसके बाद उनके ऊपर है कि वो भी उसके ऊपर उस मुद्दे पर विचार करें, पुनर्विचार करें और देखें कि इस मुद्दे में कितनी गहराई है और कितना आवश्यक है ये, अगर विश्व को हमें सेफ बनाना है टेररिज्म से। इसके साथ ही आई थिंक वी हैव कंक्लूडेड ऑल द क्वेश्चंस। थैंक यू ऑल। अच्छा, before I think let me just give you a readout of the programs tomorrow so that all of you can, anticipate it also, and especially the electronic media friends can do their TV programming accordingly. Tomorrow, Saturday the 16th of October, we will begin with a meeting with Sri Lanka. This is from 9:15 to 9:45. It will be here at Hotel Taj Exotica. So the meeting between Prime Minister and the President of Sri Lanka. This will be followed by a meeting with the Prime Minister of Bhutan from 9:45 to 10:15. 10:30 we'll have the arrival of the President of the People's Republic of Bangladesh. Must be Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister of Bangladesh would be arriving at 10:30. 10:30 marks, as you know, she would be staying at the Hotel Leela Palace. 10:30 would mark the BRICS Summit welcoming ceremony, followed by a group photo of BRICS leaders at 10:40. 10:45 to 11:50 will be the BRICS leaders restricted session meeting. At 11:30 will be the arrival of the State Councillor and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Myanmar, State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi. From 12 to 1 o'clock is the BRICS leaders restricted working luncheon. 1:05 to 1:30 will be the BRICS leaders meeting with the BRICS Business Council and a briefing by the NDB President, Mr. Kamath. From 1:30 to 2:30 will be the BRICS leaders plenary session. This is, of course, the most important session, which will take place right here in Taj Exotica, behind you in the dome. From 2:35 to 3, we will have the signing ceremony and the concluding press statement by the Prime Minister of India, at which media will be invited. Thereafter, Prime Minister then shifts to Leela Palace for the BIMSTEC outreach. 3:35 to 4:30 is the arrival ceremony of the BIMSTEC leaders, the group photo op, and the BIMSTEC retreat in Hotel Leela. 4:50 to 5 o'clock is the arrival ceremony for the BRICS leaders. Prime Minister will go in advance to have a meeting with the BIMSTEC countries' leaders, and thereafter the other BRICS leaders will be arriving at Hotel Leela. 5 o'clock will be the large group photo of the BRICS and BIMSTEC leaders. 5 to 6:30 will be the BRICS BIMSTEC Outreach Summit, followed at 6:30, from 6:30 to 8, by the BRICS and BIMSTEC Leaders Summit dinner reception. This will conclude the BRICS BIMSTEC Outreach Summit, and thereafter Prime Minister will have a couple of bilateral meetings. At 8:15 p.m., he will meet the Prime Minister of Nepal. At 9 o'clock, he will meet with the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. At 21:30, the departure of the President of Russia will take place. President Putin will depart. At 10:30 p.m., the President of the Republic of South Africa will depart. So this is the schedule, the entire schedule for tomorrow. Thank you all.